My guest today on Bridges is attorney Larry Crain, and he's going to talk to us about his work and how he helps Christians fight for faith and religious liberty. Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter. I'm glad that you could join us today. My guest is attorney Larry Crain, and it's so good to have you on the program today.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you for all the work you're doing with Bridges.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, as I've read about some of your work as an attorney and I went to your website, I saw that you do lots of different types of legal work, but one of the areas that you work in is helping churches and helping Christians fight for their religious freedoms. How did that start for you?
You know, it's been an interesting journey. Psalm 37:23, I think, says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way." And looking back, that's true of my life. My first year out of law school, I had no intention of pursuing this area of practice, but you know, about 12 churches contacted me because the city of Nashville at the time was trying to impose a fee on all church-owned property for, of all things, fire and police protection. And it was really just
a fee.
A fee, cleverly disguised tax. And so we challenged that and prevailed, but through that case, I began getting calls from ministries and churches and pastors across the state. And, you know, today we represent and are fortunate to represent a number of churches across the country and Christians in religious liberty types of situations. So I can see how it's been a progression over my practice of 30 plus years. But it's been a rewarding practice. I truly believe I've had the best clients of any attorney.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Through this.
That is wonderful. Because I would think having great clients would make all the difference in a law practice. Because I would think with some of them, it could just really be a nightmare.
Right.
But yet your steps have been ordered by God because you weren't thinking to work with churches or Christians. It just, that God brought that to you.
It was right not long after my conversion to Christ, my last year of law school. And
so you became a Christian your last year of law school?
I did, and it completely changed directions for me in what I wanted to do. It's interesting because I'd been hired already in my last year by a good firm in Nashville that was the chief partner was the president of the ACLU, and they were very left-leaning, very liberal in their approach. And when I began representing Christian causes, it led to a division that I ultimately had to go out on my own. And so that was a step of faith, but God, of course, honored it. And, you know, from there, I got an invitation to Washington, D.C. to work with a national Christian firm called the Rutherford Institute. And that broadened the platform for me to represent individuals in situations where their religious faith was being challenged. And so it opened a broad door for me, and for the next several years, we stayed there in Virginia outside of the Beltway. It really, I think, began to hone my skills as an attorney in constitutional law. And when I eventually moved back home to Nashville, I began work with, some may know, the American Center for Law and Justice, the work of Jay Sekulow and that group. And I was with them for about 15 years as their senior counsel. So it's been a rewarding journey, and one that continues today is you know, churches and ministries are facing challenges they've never faced before.
Well, and I think we have concerns that we've never had before.
We do.
Legally. And people want to be able to express their faith, and we use terms, Larry, like, well, this is America. We're a free country. We should be able to pray in school and read the Bible and do all of these things. And yet we see that challenged. And we see that come to the forefront, and people have to fight for that. And so you've found yourself in some cases like that, correct?
I have. It's been interesting, the types of cases, and I never know what's going to come next. But we've had, you know, the gospel today, if those who espouse the gospel are in the broad stream culture of our country being more and more marginalized today, that person who really takes a stand for their faith will face some degree of persecution for it. And that may be just the loss of their job. It may be some form of outward attempt to silence them or stifle them from their speech. But I have found that those who stand firm on their convictions and have sincere religious beliefs about why they're wanting to do this, courts will ultimately recognize the sincerity of a person's religious beliefs. And so, individuals like, I had a situation with a nurse not long ago who, because of her Christian convictions, didn't want to participate in abortions. A lady was brought into the hospital for that purpose who wanted to terminate a late term abortion and pregnancy. And when she refused, she was fired because of it. So, in all walks of life, we find that when people take a stand for their faith, in today's culture, there's a good likelihood they're going to be challenged for that.
And we have to expect that in some regard, right?
We have
because
to.
Even the Bible says that we will be persecuted for our faith and that we should be happy and joyous about it. Now, I have to be honest, I never feel happy and joyous about it initially, right? Because it's hard.
It is hard.
None of us like that, to be challenged, especially when we feel like it's for God's work or it's a right thing. But there is that level of persecution, and then we say, but it's America, so does somebody have the right to get rid of me on my job? Do they?
No, they don't. There are laws protecting religious expression, even in the workplace, and in our schools and public forum. I mean, they're simply, you cannot silence the debate on the public square because one person's message is biblical, even though there are attempts to do so. But we're called to be salt and light. And you're right, the Bible does tell us that as Jesus was persecuted, we too should expect to be. And so I tell my clients a lot of times that, think of it in terms of a persecution index. And the more you're being persecuted, it's a good indication that you're being effective.
Amen.
So.
Yeah. And I think to change our thinking in regard to that, like when we look at some of the current conversation in this world, it can be disturbing, right?
Sure.
Because I hear people talk about, as Christians, as if we hate people and we're just monsters and we just want to control everybody's life. And I think that's not the message of the gospel at all. And yet I realize that if you're not a Christian and you're not seeing through spiritual eyes, that might be just the way that lost person sees it. And that we have to be able to bear up. We have to be able to endure through that. And so what is the point that we would get legal involved?
Well, each of these cases has to be carefully viewed because on the basis of that case alone, you may set a precedent that will affect a cross-section of people. So you want to be cautious in making sure that you choose a case good on its facts, that the clients appear to be genuine and sincere, and that if you win that case, as we have seen over the years, you don't just win for them, but you help win for all Christians who engage in that conduct.
Right. And that's what you mean really by setting a precedent. It's like if you get a genuine, honest person who's telling a real story,
Right.
and they really get persecuted, loss of job, something like that, and they come to you, if you can win that, then other Christians don't have to fight that fight.
Exactly. You've gained ground for everyone.
So what happened with the nurse?
Well, she lost her job, and she worked in a hospital in Northern Virginia, and ultimately we were able to get her back pay and benefits for the loss of her employment based on a law that we call Title VII, which is a federal employment protection. But she's a godly lady. You would love her if you met her.
I'm sure.
But she went through a tough time there for a few months.
Yeah. And I think we have to expect that in our faith sometimes. We don't like it.
Right.
You mentioned even your last year in law school is when you became a Christian, already had a great job with a liberal law firm. But that was a test of your faith to say, I'm here this really isn't the way that my Christian life is going, and to step out on your own, that's hard.
It is hard, and with a wife and a child at home too,
Yeah.
it's a tough decision. But you know, God honored that step of faith, and my practice grew. I began to get referrals from these churches that I'd represented, and it just kind of incrementally took off. So no regrets.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What other kind of work do you help churches with?
You know, we believe that while we're not theologians, we're lawyers, that we can provide legal advice from a biblically informed perspective, and that churches can flourish. And if we help build a hedge of protection around churches, that God's a God of order, and that we can help through their planning and organizational documents to help protect them. You know, tomorrow I'm meeting with a church that's facing an internal struggle over a person who's refused to honor biblical admonition about their lifestyle. I represented Two Rivers Baptist Church years ago in a huge division that began with a small handful of people in that church that was nationally known.
I remember that.
And I said to myself, this is not the way church should be.
No.
And so we formed what's called the Church Law Institute. We now help provide advice to churches, representation to churches, and we've seen a number of churches come to us that were in a state of not having bylaws in place, for example, that was an invitation to disaster if they came. So churches face a lot of internal structures, but even external forces that can put them in a legal bind. So we believe that a comprehensive way of advising churches to help protect them is a useful ministry that God's using today to help a lot of those in our state and nationally.
Because, you know, when I think of church, Larry, I guess I really don't think that they need any legal help, right? Because you're just preaching the gospel, you're teaching people about God, you know, all of that. And yet, like when you mentioned the Two Rivers situation, I remember when that was a great big news thing and my heart just broke. That a church was just absolutely in disarray and falling apart because some people had a problem.
Yeah. And, you know, the toughest battles churches face many times are inside their walls. You know, God tells us that the forces of hell will not prevail against the church, but inside the church, churches are made of individuals like you and I who are fallen, and, you know, they're subject to a lot of legal difficulty. And so with a little planning, though, we can be proactive and help those churches fend off those attacks.
And that's what God would want, for churches to be well guarded and protected. We've got to take a break. We want you to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment right here on Bridges.
Don't miss another episode of Bridges. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today, where you can find all of Monica's latest teachings and interviews. It's easy to do. Just visit youtube.com, search Monica Schmelter, and click subscribe. Once you are subscribed, click the bell icon to get notified when a new episode is available to view. Thanks for watching Bridges.
Join the Bridges community on Facebook. Visit Facebook and search for Bridges with Monica. We would love to connect with you.
For more information on today's guest, visit the website on your screen.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, Larry Crain is my guest, and we're talking about his work as an attorney and how he helps churches and Christians fight the good fight of the faith. And so, Larry, I've been enjoying talking with you. I think, you know, I talk to Christians on this program every single day, and most of the time the thought is, well, we're really not going to need any legal help because we're just doing God's work. And yet we know that that's not true. God wants us to protect his house and to be good stewards. But you also help people fight for religious liberties and loss of potential freedom. Can you share a case with us?
You know, there have been so many over the years. One that sticks out in my mind, though, that I think of often is a young lady. Her name is Angela Guidry, and she was graduating from her high school at Sam Houston High School in Calcasieu Parish, Lake Charles, Louisiana. Angela's mother called me actually first and said, my daughter is graduating valedictorian.
Wow.
And they have asked to review her valediction speech. And so she turned in her speech to the principal. Angela, being a godly Christian young lady, gave credit for her academic success to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And you can guess what happened. The principal took a red pen and marked through her speech and struck through any reference to Christ or to God, and said, you can give this speech. For Angela, though, it was, it basically deprived her of sharing with her fellow students what she believed was the cause and reason for her success. And so she refused to give her valediction speech. And so we represented Angela. It became a very celebrated case at the time. Focus on the Family picked it up. And she got a letter from the President of the United States.
Oh, my goodness.
Congratulating her for her faith and her stand. So I think back about Angela's case a lot when I'm representing clients who are faced with making a difficult decision. Mm-hmm. You know, do I forego what would be my legal right and stand firm on my beliefs? And I found that when you don't compromise your faith, that not only does God honor it, but you are a source of encouragement mm-hmm. for those around you.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about somebody just being a senior in high school that would have the internal fortitude to just say, no, I'm not going to give this speech. I'm not going to, most students would be, well, the principal marked this out in red.
Right.
So this is what I need to do, right?
Right.
And yet she had the kind of faith and the kind of belief that said, no, I'm not going to compromise. That's a lot for a young lady that age.
It really is. The peer pressure was tremendous on her, I'm sure. But that was a good outcome for her. And there have been several, if I had the time to share, of people who, like Angela, have said, I'm not going to compromise my faith. And we as Christians shouldn't have to do so.
Right.
The Constitution protects our right to speak out and to share and to even proselytize to others. And even within our public schools, students are free to engage in student-initiated type of religious activity. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people that believe, when they're told that they have to silence their beliefs, that's the law, and it simply is not.
Right. It's just what people are saying because they're uncomfortable with what's going to happen.
Right.
So if they can say it to us, and if I listen, then they won, because then I didn't say anything about Jesus, and now we don't risk any potential outfall.
Right.
So you're saying we really have more rights than what we think.
We do, and more than are being practiced many times, because misinformation that's being shared in so many different forums today. The public school has been a battleground in many of the cases that I've had because of its clear attempts to pull out any mention of Christian beliefs within the setting of the public school, and even with the rights of teachers being affected. So, a lot of the cases that I've had over the years have been in that context. But employment today is becoming a big issue.
How so?
Well, there's this movement that I know many of your listeners are familiar with called cancel culture. And those who share their religious views that may disagree with the narrative being proclaimed today in mainstream media are being fired over that. Or they're being told to remove their statements from Facebook and so forth. I represent a dozen police officers in the city of Philadelphia right now, and all of whom were fired or suspended over their expressions on Facebook, many of them out of their religious beliefs, But
Like on their personal Facebook page?
their personal Facebook pages. And they were careful not to identify themselves as police officers on their Facebook page. But the city of Philadelphia, and in particular the mayor that's there now, has staunchly opposed any such expression. You know, these officers are all honored, decorated men who have put their lives on the line, and
Wow.
women. So it seems to be a symptom we're seeing nationally right now.
Well, Christians seem to be very unpopular right now.
They
Like
do.
when I look
they
in
do.
the media and I look at all of that, I think, yeah, we're not very popular. Like they really don't like us right now and don't like many of the things that we stand for. And I think that that's different than what it was even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It seems to be getting harder.
In my lifetime, I've seen it. I think you're right. It is worse today than I have seen it ever in my practice of 30-something years. I just really believe now that we're at a point in this country where unless we see a miracle of turning back, that we're going to continue to see that decline.
You know, I agree. And we could see a miracle of turning back. But in lieu of that, we're really going way the other way as a culture.
Yeah.
And people are not wanting to acknowledge God. And it almost seems like, Larry, that it's okay to have any other faith but Christianity.
When you have
I want to ask you about that.
Well, when you have a nominee for the U.S.
Excuse me.
Supreme Court who's criticized at her confirmation hearing on the basis of her religious beliefs, that the dogma lives deeply within you, those kind of criticisms of a lady who is, by all accounts, a very, very skilled judicial officer. So, it's kind of, I guess, to me at least, it's dissembling because the fact that we have people who are being criticized on that basis, and it's okay to challenge them for their religious position.
You know, but it's awful that it's happening.
It is. It is. But, the bright side is this. In this kind of culture today, if you do take a stand and you do represent your beliefs consistently, you become a brighter light
Yes.
in your community. And I think that we will be known, or at least Christians will be known more for their stand today than perhaps ever before.
Well, because that opportunity is there.
Right.
And because there are people who I feel confident really don't know right from wrong, right?
Right.
They really have bought into whatever that deception is. So this is an opportunity for us to stand firm and strong and do everything in love, all at the same time. Like, it's a time for us to shine brightly, to be clear about who we are, to be clear about what we believe, and we don't need to make apologies for that.
Exactly. My thought exactly. I think it's time for aggressive representation in this area of the law. And I wish there were more attorneys out there who would be called to this line of work, because the need is great right now.
Well, because we don't know who to turn to when sometimes, when we lose a job or this happens at school or there's this conversation going on, it can be easy to think, well, there's so many more of them than there are of us, but yet we have a strong and mighty God behind us.
Amen.
And when we stand and when we don't compromise, it speaks volumes, even if we have to suffer for it. And I'm scared even when I say that, because I don't like suffering, right? Sure. I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be persecuted. But I don't want to compromise either.
Right. In these cases, many times, I think clients are aware that they're going into this expecting that they're going to be in a courtroom eventually, and that judges' eyes will be darkened many times to the truth of the gospel. But, I've seen miracles take place in courtrooms.
Amen.
Prosecutors fumbling over words, and, judges just wanting to question an expert on biblical principles. It's really been interesting to see how God can work in that environment.
Yeah, well, because he's not limited,
Right.
you know, and we shouldn't make him small in our thinking and in our ways. And how important is it if a person thinks that they have a case? You know, they think that they've suffered some sort of loss of religious liberty and whatever. How important is it that you deal, because I was looking on your website, that you deal with that case factually rather than emotionally? Because I think many times when it comes to persecution and all of that, we get really emotional.
It's difficult to dial down the emotions sometimes, I will admit, but there are two aspects to every case that are critical. The first is getting the facts absolutely correct, and making sure that there's no exaggeration, no hyperbole. The facts are what they are, and we can't change them. The second is applying the right law to those facts and making sure that we, we have a menu of different types of theories to choose from. Make sure we choose the right one. It may be that it's a religious liberty case, but it falls better into a free speech argument. So we use that prong instead of the other of the First Amendment. And so how you characterize their case is very important today. But yeah, I think you're right. Clients many times when they come to us, and understandably so, are very emotional.
But I think that we all have to really try to dial back, because emotions and being emotional doesn't help us win a case or make a case, or even if it's at work or in other things. I think sometimes being logical and being factual and like this is the way it is helps us get the desired result rather than being emotional.
Absolutely. And many of these cases are turn-on legal arguments where the facts are not in dispute, that the facts are what they are. And so before you ever get to a jury deciding your case, you have to go through many times the judge looking at your case to see if it's valid.
Right. Yeah, if they even agree with that. Well, we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been good to have you.
Thanks for watching Bridges. Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org. If you're looking for ways to grow your faith, we invite you to go to monicaschmelter.com, where you can watch Bridges interviews and Monica's teachings on demand. You'll also find free online extras that offer practical ways to live out your faith. Visit monicaschmelter.com, where you'll find hope, because truth changes everything.
Don't give in. God's word says you're an overcomer. It takes training. It takes discipline. And so when you're fighting that good fight of the faith, you take your story, whatever it is, and you saturate it in faith, and you fight for it.
Visit monicaschmelter.com to schedule Monica to speak at your next event.